G'day YouTubers! Welcome to our third episode of C# Learn the Right Way series. We are moving on to iteration statements, and today we are going to start with the for loop. The for loop is used to cycle and loop through any series of numbers. You basically state your variable, then you state the condition to keep looping, and then you do some work. And let me just write this out. So let's just say you want to loop through the numbers 0 through 10. So you create an integer called x, and we set it to 0. And you use the semicolon to separate each statement inside. And then your condition is next. So we say, okay, well, loop while x is less than 10, and then semicolon, and then okay, well, what do you want it to do every time it loops? So we want to increment x by 1. So you can use the x plus plus, which essentially is equivalent to x equals x. Let me make a comment that is the same as x equals x plus 1. So all it's saying is set x equals to whatever x currently is, and then add 1 to it. So it increments by 1. Okay, so we have this for loop that is going to cycle through, and I'm just going to display x. Okay, so we're going to display x. And you can see that by reading this, this is going to loop starting with 0, increment 0 by 1 every time it loops until x reaches 10. Notice that because the condition is less than 10, once x equals 10, it will not run the code in this block. The last code it will run, code block it will run, is when x is equal to 9. So let's go and run this so that I can demonstrate. And you can see we started at 0, it ran just fine, it reached 9. Now, if you had wanted to have included 10, I mean, you can either set this to 11, or you could use the less than equal to operator, and that will include 10 in its loop. Pretty straightforward. That's a for loop in a nutshell. But for further demonstration, let me show you how this is commonly used in real-world applications. I'm just going to create an array of integers. Int array equals, and let's say for to some random numbers out here, 15. Okay, that's enough. So we have an array of integers, and an array is essentially just a list of that same item, and you can access each individual item by referencing the index that of the array, and you'll see how this is demonstrated when we write a for loop. So I'm going to write the for. Okay, so for x equals, okay, we'll start with the 0 because this very first number in this array 4 is stored in C#. They use what's called a zero-based index. So the very first item of a list is in position 0, and then the second item is in position 1, the third item is in position 2. So this very first item is located in position 0, and this last item is located in position 3. So we are going to set our index to 0, and our condition is going to be the int array, and we're going to use the length property. So now the condition will be that x will run until it reaches the length of the array. And as you can see, the length of the array is 4 items, but we know this very last item is actually the index number 3, so which is wonderful because we're using the less than operator, and it should stop at 3 for purposes of demonstrating. Let me just spit out this index number. Okay, so this for loop is going to run, and as you got some funny keys. Okay, so let's run this, and as expected, you can see we start with the number 0, which is what we assigned at first, and then we determine that the length is 4, but because we're using the less than and not less than equal to operator, it will stop once it reaches, once the I equals 4, which is the length, it will not run the code block because the condition is that it has to be less than 4. So, as you can see, it is working as expected. So now, I'm going to actually, instead of outputting our I variable integer, we are going to call the array and call its index number. So now, here's our array of numbers, and we are going to put the index integer inside of that. So as you can see, the very first time this runs, it's going to call index 0. And we know that that happens to be number 4. And then it'll call index 1, which is number 2, and index 2, which is number 10. So let's go and run this. And as you can see, voila, we have iterated through our entire array, determined the length of that array, and you'll notice that right now there's only 4 numbers on the screen. If I happen to go back in here and change the size of this array and add some additional numbers and then run this code again, you'll see that it's determined the new length of this array, and the for loop will run as many times as needed to get to the end. Now, had I made the mistake and added equals on here, I am pretty sure this is going to throw an exception because we don't have one. Currently, there's 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 integers in this array, so we don't have an index 6. This last index number is index 5. So let's go and run this and see what the end result is. And you can see we have thrown an exception. If we take a look at I, which you can also see down at the watch list, is that I is equal to 6. And as mentioned, this 6 is out of the scope of this array, so we've thrown an exception. So it's very important to remember which index you're looking at and remember this concept. And anyway, well, stay tuned. Next up, we'll be hitting some more iteration statements like while, do while loops, and end off with the for each loop, which is one of my personal favorites. It's only used by C#, and it has really saved me a lot of time and effort. Cheers.